So, welcome everyone to our discussion evening, Reclaiming 1946. And we're thrilled to see you all here. And I think it's going to be a really exciting evening. We've got some wonderful guests who will be talking to us about their experiences, reflections, things that they are doing within the field. But before we get to that, I just wanted to say hi and introduce myself. My name is Kendra Mitchell Foster, and I am the Regional Minister for Justice for the Pacific Mountain region. And I am one of the co-hosts, one of the co-organizers for this evening. We've been doing lots of work in the PMR on helping to get our affirming ministries flourishing, supporting, welcoming, trying to connect everyone together. And this movie, 1946, this documentary movie, has been a really wonderful tool around which we've been able to gather and have conversations. And so I'm so pleased that everyone is here. And I would also like to introduce our co-host, Pam Rocker. She is the executive director of Affirming Connections. And if you folks haven't heard of Affirming Connections, they are our partner in doing affirming work across our region, and they do really good work across many regions. So I'm just going to hand it over to Pam, and she can introduce herself a little bit before we get going.
Thanks so much, Kendra. I'm so excited. This movie has been on my radar for years. And since it's been in progress, and I just feel so lucky to be able to be a part of it in any way. And so this discussion about the themes of the film is really near and dear to my heart. As Kendra said, I'm the director of Affirming Connections, and we're based in Southern Alberta. Um, I just want to recognize that we're on Treaty 7 land, and all of the stewards of this land that have come before us, acknowledging our shared stewardship as treaty people in the work of reconciliation. And the work of reconciliation includes this conversation. It includes not just accepting some of the truths that we've been given over time, but being open to understanding what the truth is, because we can't have reconciliation without truth. And I'm really pleased to have a partnership with Pacific Mountain Region and with Kendra and with other beautiful folks in the BC area to be able to have this conversation. And so I know most of you have probably seen the film.
So that gives you a little taste of what the documentary 1946 is about. The subtitle, which I feel is really helpful for this documentary, is The Mistranslation That Shifted Culture. So this movie is, and the research that has gone into it and all of the people that have worked on it really focuses on how this mistranslation, how the use of scripture has affected society outside of the church in a really big way. So it's this anomaly that happened in 1946 that then cascaded into a bunch of different people coming together, that there being homophobia, transphobia, there being hate, being discrimination, ostracization, marginalization, and what that means in terms of us as Christians. What is our responsibility to this? What is our responsibility as well as people who are affirming or people who are queer Christians? What is our responsibility in this case to reclaim these spaces that were taken from us because of this mistranslation? And so we'll be moving forward into our schedule. Pam, did you want to add anything to what that little summary? You've got some insights maybe you'd like to share with folks before we invite Blair to speak?
I'll just add really quick that you'll see we get to meet Ed, who you just saw in the trailer. And I think the thing that really kind of hits home for me in so much of the discussion around this film is not just this specific verse, although obviously it is a huge, huge, the byline of the film is the mistranslation that shifted culture, and it did, and it still is in many ways. But I think what is really interesting is just having the openness and the idea that there are ways in which power has been used over time to marginalize those who are already marginalized or to keep them in their place. And to me, it really helps sort of remind me of, even in my own life and in my own faith practices, what are the things that I believe or that I've been told that maybe actually don't line up with the love of God that is available to all of us, right? So this in specific is really relevant to me as a queer person for sure, but I think it also invites us into a holistic understanding of what are some of the things that we've sort of staked our faith in, whether um, consciously or subconsciously, that maybe need another review, right? Is it who is benefiting from what we think? Who is staying in power from what we believe? Who is staying marginalized and doesn't have a seat at the table because of what we believe. And so I think that in so many ways, this film sort of like it opens up this really needed discussion around 2S LGBTQ communities, and it opens up sort of this gateway for us to have even more intersectional, deeper conversations. So yeah, so all of that, and I'll give it back to Kendra to introduce the amazing Blair.
The amazing Blair. I think that that's a really accurate description. So I'm just so thrilled to welcome Blair Odney, Reverend Blair Odney, to share some of his perspectives, experiences, some of his stories about what it means to address all of these different themes in real life, in the community, as a Christian person. And so I just wanted to give a little bit of background. He is illustrious. He has been, he has affected very positively many different congregations as a congregational minister. He's also been the president of our region before, and it was illustrious for us that he was there helping to shape our whole church as a region. And he's done some really wonderful work with church planting with Sanctuary on 6th, and you'll hear a little bit about some of the work that has evolved from there. So I will say no more because he's much more interesting to listen to. And welcome, Blair. Please enlighten us with some of your stories.
Oh, Kendra. Who, who is that guy? Oh my goodness. Uh, um, Thank you for all of that, for your generous words. That's very kind, and I'm delighted to be here. I want to say to all of you, it's good of you to take time out of your summer schedules to consider the cost of this biblical mistranslation. Anytime that I can be part of bringing clarity to the scriptures and to help make the scriptures more clear to others, then I'm in. These are living stories. This is a living word. These stories have relevance to our lives now, all of our lives. And so when I can be part of something that animates God's word for our lives, I'm all in. So thank you, Kendra and Pam, for inviting me. It's a privilege. Let me first acknowledge that I live and work on the traditional and unceded territories of the Coast Salish people, and more particularly the Halkomelin speaking peoples and the Kakite First Nation in New Westminster in British Columbia. And while I originally come from the lands of Treaty 7 in what we know as Southern Alberta, I know that my church family ancestors here and across the country have played a destructive part in the colonization of these lands. We made invisible people's histories, their spirituality, and their connection to each other and to the land. So I want to be part of a church that is trying to be church differently, working to reconcile, repair, and recreate new relationships and a new story. What's interesting to me is even as I make that acknowledgement, we could be speaking about the queer community because of this mistranslation. Actually, I might even word it in this way. The mistranslation has allowed us to bring our social fears and constructs and prejudices alive and make them okay. I think it was I think it was in 1976 at 11 p.m. Christmas Eve service when I discovered that differing perspectives on the interpretation of Scripture could lead to violence. I was 19. It was the first Christmas Eve that I sang in the tenor section of the choir at Knox United Church in Calgary. The place was packed. A Jewish friend once said to me, "We always go to Knox on Christmas Eve. It's a great event." And on this occasion, 4 friends of mine from the Foursquare Gospel Church decided to check out what was becoming really important to me. My family was also at worship that night because we also always went to Knox at Christmas Eve. And they watched the whole thing unfold. My friends from Foursquare started off in the 3rd row of the main floor, about 3 rows from the front. My mom told me that that didn't seem to be good enough because the 4 of them made their way into one of the transept galleries up, and she said it was up on the left. And she's convinced even to the day she died that what happened was intentional. Knox is a very traditional neo-Gothic Presbyterian cathedral in the cruciform, right? The building forms the shape of a cross. The main floor is called the nave. The 2 ends of what would be the crossbeam of the cross are called transepts. There were 3 balconies in the place, 1 at the back and 2 in the transepts. That's where these friends ended up, in the front row, up there, right above the pulpit, right below the floor. I didn't know any of this was happening when the choir processed into the sanctuary from the back singing, "Oh, come all ye faithful." I just saw Tony and Tracy and Chris and Lisa sitting up there. The service proceeded. Grand, big organ, lots of music, Christmas lights, candlelight, Christmas trees, big United Church. The Christmas story from Luke's gospel was read, and like every other year, the minister, who actually ended up being my first father-in-law, read a Christmas story, carefully selected for the evening. He had that kind of voice that sounded like, grandpa telling you and reading you a bedtime story. And that was the effect. Peaceful, gentle, a silent night. The story ended. There was a pause. And then the minister called for the next hymn. That's when my friend Tony from the Foursquare Gospel Church, the one sitting up in the front row of the transept balcony, shouted, "Wait, there's more." And you could see, like, his face was red. And then he proceeded to preach this usual message of a suffering Christ and your personal Lord and Savior. And when the minister turned to the organist to say, "Wait," the organist heard, "Go on." And the introduction to the next hymn drowned Tony out completely. It's a big organ. Tony got so angry, he threw his hymn book from the top of the balcony right down onto the main floor, narrowly missing Phyllis Hemming, who always sat in the front pew at the end, right under that balcony. All 4 friends got up, ran down the balcony stairs, into the sanctuary, and out the side transept doors. Do you know what? When I think about it today, I still process feelings of shame and confusion and anger and betrayal that I experienced that night. How could my friends cast judgment so righteously over a difference in how Christmas Eve is experienced, with Jews and likely Muslims and atheists and drunk people in the crowd simply waiting to hear a story? For God's sake, Tony, read your audience. In my mind, more damage was done that night in Jesus' name than anything else. And seriously, think of this. God needs our protection. Seriously. We humans think we have the power to alter the mind of God, to change the mood of God simply because of some confession. That, to me, is the height of human arrogance. And I can only, when I think of that night and how it impacted me, I can only imagine the violence that many of you have experienced in our culture, in our churches, over someone you love. I live in humble gratitude and profound respect for those pioneers who went through the AIDS crisis and all the rage and violence that went with it, so that a path could be cleared for me, a path of some kind of normal decency for when I came out in 2011. And how much collateral damage has the church perpetuated because it made a decision to get the Bible to say what the cultural norm wanted it to say. So, fast forward to 2022, near the end of my career as a minister in the United Church, which continues to call me to lifelong orders in the church. It's kind of the reason why I said yes to Pam and Kendra. I had been part of a new church plant called Sanctuary on 6th in what used to be called Queens Avenue United Church, the oldest Methodist congregation in British Columbia. Part of that ministry was the Rainbow Chorus of New Westminster. I formed that chorus because of the collateral damage and the emotional and physical violence perpetuated over a decision to weaponize the Bible. Let me confess that I'm a universalist. Simply stated in almost like childlike tenderness, universalism is simply everyone gets to heaven, whether you believe it or not, whether you confess Jesus as Lord or not, whether you follow any religious tradition or oppose all religious traditions. We all come from one place, and it's to that place we return when we die, period. And crazy as it sounds, not only was the Apostle Paul on about it in everything that he wrote, I won't get into Paul tonight, but I argue he was a universalist too. Science is teaching us that it's true. We come from one place and we return to it. Oh, look at that. Science and scripture are in conversation with each other. Lo and behold, I digress. I formed the Rainbow Chorus because the good news is still the good news. Christ is still alive, transforming lives. It's not a transaction. This is not believe in Jesus and you'll go to heaven. If God's love is unconditional and God declared all that had been made is good, it's in the first few verses of the Bible, and God delighted in all that had been made, then surely God is going to find any way God can to be in relationship with what God made. And in spite of the Christian church, God finds a way to be in relationship with what God made. That's the point of Easter. It might not be in the church's language. It might not be in the church's style. It's absolutely not the church's job to decide who God will be in relationship with. It is the church's job to meet people and love them where they are. Give them an opportunity to live into the transforming grace of that love. Invite them into the next best version of themselves, the most creative, the most joy-filled, the most alive, and then send them back into the world as witnesses to that love. That's it. The church has no other job because that's what Christ did. As the living body of the living Christ, that's our job. And so I formed the Rainbow Chorus to do exactly that in language that people who've been bruised and beaten by the church could understand. I formed the Rainbow Chorus to help people connect to something larger than themselves, to create something of beauty and joy that they could share with those they love, where love and affirmation were lived experiences. People in the queer community and their allies whose experience of the church has been anything but loving and affirming. So in its first season in 2022, 60 people registered. People as far away as Langley and downtown Vancouver came to New Westminster on a Monday night. There were Jews, there were Christians, atheists, Wiccans, pagans. Lots were suspicious of the church. Some had not darkened the door of a church since they were booted out for being gay. They came to sing. They came to see their people. They came to build community. They came to create something really pretty, beautiful. If the good news is still the good news, and God is going to find any way God can to be in relationship with what God made in spite of the church, then Dancing Queen is a spiritual song. So is Cyndi Lauper's True Colors and Rainbow Connection from the Muppet movie and Leonard Cohen's Hallelujah. The debut performance of the Rainbow Chorus in New Westminster at the newly named Sanctuary on 6th was an event like a great opening. The energy in the sanctuary was electric. Anyone who knows anything about drag queens in Vancouver will know the name Carlotta Girl. She is one of Vancouver's top drag queens, and she was our host. She gave us at least 7 costume changes with wigs. Peter Julian, New Westminster's MP, was in the audience. So was his assistant, Doris Ma. Family, friends, looky-loos, the old congregation. My mentor and friend, Vicki Lanny from Peoria, Illinois, was in the audience. She picked the winning raffle tickets. There was a raffle in a United Church. And for the first time in a long time, for many in the queer community, the evening felt normal, safe, kind, joyful. For many, the great gay anthems of love, acceptance, imagination, and protest saved their lives. And maybe in that first season, the church finally did its job to give people back to themselves with a resounding yes to who they are, who they love, and who they're becoming.
Thank you so much for sharing them, Blair. It's wonderful to hear that background and to hear your reflections. I just have a couple of little notes to share with people that the new Westminster Rainbow Chorus, if you had a chance to be at the Pacific Mountain Region AGM this past May/June, it's right on that cusp weekend, then, or if you had a chance to tune in, because this was, some of the stuff was online as well, then you might have experienced our Affirming with the Arts evening that we had. And you would also have experienced the songs, the singing, the performance, and the love from the new West Rainbow Chorus. They came and opened our evening with True Colors, and there was not a dry eye in the house. It was our AGM was held at St. Andrew's Wesley, so a big, beautiful church with great acoustics. And if you are looking forward in time to some of our Pacific Mountain region streaming for being worships, their music will be featured there too. And I just wonder, Blair, if you could take, maybe a minute just to describe a little bit about who are the people that are in the chorus? What kinds of folks come together, and what kinds of relationships or healing do you see continuing to happen, given now that you stepped back from the directing the choir and that now there's a new choir director, but you can still see these sorts of things unfolding. Is there anything that you can tell us about the people of the chorus?
Well, the chorus comprises the members of the queer community and their allies. So you'll see every color. You'll see members of New West Pride Society. You'll see straight couples. You'll see queer couples. You'll see there's a beautiful, lovely trans man and his wife who are part of the Rainbow Chorus. You'll and people with varying degrees. I told you there's a Wiccan, there's a Wiccan. And she's like, and we talk spiritually. We would, right? I can't not be who I am. I find all sorts of ways to kind of find inroads to have conversations that actually unpack how God is going to love them. Anybody, anywhere, anytime God chooses, not who I choose or anybody else's chooses. It's kind of, this is God's love, not anybody else's, right? So that's the experience. Many people would have reflected many times. In fact, I was talking to Frank today about a different matter, and I told him I was doing this event, and he said, it's so funny. We did this church thing, and but people are saying we're not a church choir. No, you're not, but you are. And you're singing songs of love and compassion. And so it's a cool experience. And Frank is a brilliant and beautiful conductor. He has got the choir sounding so beautifully. It's fantastic. I don't know if that's helpful. Is that the answer that you were looking for, Kendra?
Yes, absolutely. And I just wanted to tell a little bit of story for myself. Um, that when we were inviting the Rainbow Chorus to come and sing in the church, there was a little footnote in that invitation and the response to the invitation that this would be the first time for many people in many years to set foot in a church where they weren't practicing, in a church where they were coming for a church function, and that there were some people that needed to pause and think about that. Think about what it meant for them to re-enter a space that they swore perhaps they would never enter again. And so I wanted to just lift that up to say that this is a group of people who are also community folks. This is a way that the United Church is reaching into the community to hold healing space, not necessarily saying, come in and be with us, but we're saying, or well, the Rainbow Chorus and Frank and yourself are saying, we would like to come out and be with you, which is another way of reclaiming. And I just thank you so much for your story, for inviting us into that experience of the first performance, and for setting us up so well with open hearts, open eyes, and ears to listen to our next speaker, Ed. And so I'll hand it over to you, Pam.
Thanks, Kendra, and thank you so much, Blair. Um, I'm so pleased to introduce Ed, who I feel like needs no introduction, but at the same time, I learned more about Ed, even though I've seen this film many times and I've had the chance to meet Ed in person a couple of times. I learned more about Ed, which deepens my appreciation for um, what it means, what this film means, and also the journey that Ed has been on, just as a person and as a person of faith. So Ed Oxford was on staff with the Campus Crusade for Christ in the 1990s, serving in Illinois and then Tokyo, Japan. After returning to California, he obtained his MDiv from Talbot Seminary and worked on the pastoral staff team at a church in Gardena, California. Ed left this position to work in the finance industry, hoping to earn enough money to afford reparative therapy. After years of depression and no change, he went to a Kathy Baldock seminar in 2016. You see Kathy in the 1946 film, and learned that the word homosexual was not in the Bible until 1946. With a fervent desire to learn how this happened, he started on a journey of intense research, and in 2017, he located Bible translation notes in the archives of Yale, and with Kathy, made a discovery which led to the 1946 documentary. Welcome, Ed.
Thank you guys for having me. It's good to be here. You guys, I love what you guys are doing in Canada. So many good things. And it's interesting. Every time I get a chance to speak to a Canadian group, I get so excited because did you guys know that the first 7 years after the Revised Standard Version became made known? So they finished the New Testament in 1946, but they finished the Old Testament by 1952. So 1952 is the official year that it gets let into the whole public. The next 7 years, 1952 to 1959, they only get two people standing up and saying, hey, we noticed you put this word homosexual in there. Can you tell us why? What's going on there? Both of those two people, 100%, were from Canada. So thank you, you guys, for what you guys do for challenging and making things happen here. So this is good news. So there's a lot I could share. I want to make sure I'm kind of hitting it where people want it. So I could talk about a number of different things, but I want to make sure I'm saying what you guys are wanting to hear, some areas so I'm assuming everybody has seen 1946, the movie. So if you had any questions, concerns behind the scenes, there is a lot of behind the scenes information. Sometimes we just give seminars on behind the scenes and it goes on because there's so much information. Plus, I didn't know anything about putting together a movie or a documentary until this happened, but there is a lot of material that never makes it to the final cut. So there's a lot of good information, some good stories and so forth in there. But I'll leave this up to you guys.
So I just wanted to start off with one question, but then please, folks, please avail yourself of this chance that we have to talk directly with Ed. If you have a question and maybe you don't want to share it publicly for any reason, feel free to just send a direct message to either me or Kendra, and then we can posit the question for you. Ed, something that I was thinking about is we were talking a little bit earlier just about how tightly some folks still hold on to mistranslations when there's so much evidence, not feelings, not hopes, like when there's so much evidence to the contrary. And I'm just curious, like, what do you think is still the benefit? Why are some of these things, and particularly this mistranslation, being held onto, like white knuckle held onto? What is the benefit for those folks to still kind of hold on to this? Why is this still a thing in an age where most of us have access to information, more information to find out more? I wonder about your thoughts on that.
Oh, I have a lot of thoughts, and it's going to be different depending on the person you're talking to. So a number of issues, a number of problems, a number of answers to those number of problems and what's going on. So one of the big things that we notice of here in the US, those of us, who are unfortunate enough to live here, but it might not be for much longer if things keep going crazily. One of the things that we've noticed is people don't care about facts anymore. It just doesn't matter. And I think, we were getting ready to release the movie, release the book, everything. 2020 was our year. And then COVID came and publishers shut down. We still wanted to do some more research. Research institutions were closed. There was no travel. Everything was so different. And so we had to put some things on the back burner for a while. But what we got to see in 2020 as a result of all that went down regarding COVID and then the US political scene, and facts just didn't matter. Like you could show anything on a video and people were still going to believe what they wanted to believe. And they didn't really care about the facts. And I think that got me really depressed in 2020, maybe even more than COVID things. It was because I was like, we're ready to introduce this wonderful information, that undisputable, irrefutable facts that we want to put before the Christian theologians in the world and say, hey, let's talk about this. And then when we realized facts didn't matter anymore, I got kind of depressed during that time, because I was like, what can we do if people don't care about facts, and where do we go from here? So some people are in this category of, that's our tribe. And so we see this tribal mentality take place in the world of politics. We're seeing that take place in this world of the LGBT inclusion. My own brother, we don't talk to each other anymore. He used to be my best friend. I was the best man in his wedding. Had a great relationship all these years, and we haven't spoken in years because of this. Because I only came out to him 6 or 7 years ago, so it's not even that long ago. And everything went south, and then he turned most of the family against me. It was not a pretty picture. So kind of dealing with that whole thing, and I can remember some of the few things he did say before communication was halted, and that was, he said, well, if you're saying that this part of the Bible, there's a mistake, if something's wrong with there, then what else could be wrong? And that's a slippery slope. And if you go down the slippery slope, look at what you're on the precipice of doing, you're saying. And I want to make it so clear, so clear. And in the seminars I'm in, probably the best compliment I got was in February from all the seminars that I've done. This lady came up to me, probably in her 40s, and she said, it was a lesbian lady who had veered away from the church and looking at the Bible for decades. And she said, she came to me, and after all that I was talking about, and I said things like, we need to reclaim the true message of the gospel and stop letting these people sidestep what's really going on in these passages, because they take something, they twist it, and they focus only on the LGBT portion of Genesis 19, of Leviticus 18, Leviticus 20. And we go to Romans 1, 1 Corinthians 6:9, 1 Timothy 1:10, and we only see the gay part of that, or the anti-gay part of that. And then as a result, we don't even see what's really being taught there, because they're twisting the meaning and the understanding of those passages to the point that we miss out on so much. We need to reclaim the Bible from these people who have taken it captive and twisted it to their abusive manners, and go back and say, you guys can't do this anymore. The message is still there. It's still true. So whatever Christians have done to pervert the message of the Bible over the last few hundred years, we need to go back and look and see what's really there. And I've seen so many people get excited about that. But she came up and she said, you know what? She said, I have been afraid to go and study the Bible before, and I can't wait to get back into it now and see what God's got there for me. That was the best compliment I could get of anything of the work that I've done, because the whole goal is to not throw out the baby with the bathwater. Jesus, let's look at Jesus. And let's not look and see what Christians are saying about Jesus that might not be true. Let's look at the true Jesus. That's what it's all about. And if that means we have to step back a few paces, we have to look at some accurate information before we go forward, well, then let's do it. Let's take our time and let's do it, and let's do it right. Because we owe it to each other. We owe it to this planet. We owe it to God. And so no longer let people kind of steal that and go from there. So I see people in a few different categories. Some other things that I see is a lot of pride, especially amongst the top evangelical theologians who are not willing to move an inch. I'm thinking of Robert Gagnon. I'm thinking of Sean McDowell, Josh McDowell, James White, Michael Brown. I could go on and on. There is so much pride. They are unwilling to look and to deal with the data. And I've even challenged them. I get hate mail from several of them on a regular basis. And I talk to them and I say, let's look at all these details. And their information or their responses, I don't need to look at the details. I already know what God is saying about homosexuality. So why do I need to waste my time? And so a lack of willingness, this high pride. And so it's weird because they accuse gay people of the sin of pride during Pride Month, when I see more straight people have issues with pride than I do gay people, who are very good at humility. So I think we need to see more humility amongst our theological leaders, amongst pastors and people that are out there. And because you can't learn if you are blocked by pride. The sin of homophobia will blind people from looking at facts and looking at truth. So to challenge people to those truths and those facts is really hard to do when they're not even willing to listen. They're not even willing to give it a chance. So sometimes it takes relationship that we have to have with people, patience that we have to have with people going into these relationships, and to win the right to talk and to share with them truths and facts about what's actually there. And I'm talking about irrefutable facts, things that no one can say. Okay, for example, the German Bible started doing these translations and started translating these clobber passages back as early as 1534. 1534, the German version of the Bible in the Old Testament, Leviticus 18, Leviticus 20 says, instead of man shall not lie with man as he does with a woman, the German Bible says man shall not lie with young boys as he does with a woman. It says that in both Levitical passages. We fast forward over to Romans 1, or, I'm sorry, 1 Corinthians 6:9 and 1 Timothy 1:10. And the German word used there for those who will not inherit the kingdom of heaven, the kingdom of God, is Knabenschänder. Knabenschänder means boy molesters. And there's even in the Swedish version, or I'm sorry, the Norwegian version, the word used there, a lot of my friends who are fluent in Norwegian say that that word is even associated with a certain age range of boys. So it was basically a type of pederasty. It was pederasty, which is a subcategory of pedophilia in the last 500 years, was the primary teaching for most Bibles in most of Europe, for most of European history, for most of Bible history, for 4 out of the 6 clobber passages. So the vast majority of clobber passages taught this. And so for us to just toss out the last 1,500 to 2,000 years of Bible history in exchange for this modern homosexuality that just came about to be. And the weird thing is the Germans are the ones who continue to keep that word Knabenschande in every updated German version from 1534 up until modern times. They had about 27 to 35 different updated versions. You know, we've done the same thing in English. We have updated English versions all the time. We have 450 English translations, versions, paraphrases of the Bible since 1378 when Wycliffe did the first English version. But all of these updated versions in the German from 1534 until modern times, Knabenschänder, boy molester, every single one, they use the same word for arsenokoitai until 1983 when they changed it to the German word for homosexual, homosexual. And they put it in there finally in 1983. Well, what happened in 1983? Well, that was after starting of the AIDS crisis, but mostly reflective of what was going on in the 70s. Well, Biblica, which is the publishing company that owns the rights to the NIV, New International Version, worked on this German version of 1983. So they brought in American translators and American versions and American Bibles. And of course, the Germans are like, well, if the Americans are doing homosexual for for this word instead of Knabenschande, maybe we should too. So they put the word in there because of the influence from these stupid Americans. Sorry, pardon my French. Stupid Americans here. And the mistakes that we made, we exported our garbage to Germany. And of all people who should have known to put the word homosexual in there, it should have been the Germans who invented the word homosexual in the 1860s by combining a Latin word and a Greek word. It wasn't even a word. They said we need something to show what we're observing. So they came up with homosexual, which is half Latin, half Greek. And they had this word from the 1860s and never thought to put it in their version when they upgraded until the Americans influenced them. So it's a very sad story. These are irrefutable facts, irrefutable facts. Anybody who knows. And I know, you know, I had an article that went public a few years ago. It's got, I think, about 3 million views on it. And every now and then, when I get bored, which doesn't happen too often, I want to go in and see what people, because people are still reading this article and they're making comments on it. So if there are 3 million views, there are tens of millions of comments. So there's a lot of comments out there. And so sometimes I'll read the comments and kind of see what people are saying and what's going back and forth. And a lot of times they would take this article, which is what I just introduced to you, the word Knabenschande, boy molesters, it got changed here, so what's going on. And they would run this article up to the highest level theologian that they knew. And they would just put them on their Facebook, post it and send it to them. And then they would want to hear their comments on it. And a lot of these theologians, the first thing they would say when they were talking about me, they would say, well, the first thing I notice here is that the person that they're interviewing in this article happens to be gay. So obviously he's biased, and he goes down this, you know, they go down this whole path saying all these things. And then other people would chime in and they would say, you know what? He's right, though. I just looked it up. I speak German. And you know what? I have 3 other European languages I know. And I looked it up in those too. And in the 1800s, this is what the word they use. Here's the word they use. Here's the word they use. And so everybody, it was like a point of discovery for so many people. And so then some people came in and they said, whether he's gay or not, it doesn't matter. What he's saying is actually true. So let's talk about what he said rather than try and destroy his character. And I think, that's the thing. We need straight allies. We always will. Without straight allies, I would never be where I am today because I needed people without skin in the game to go into battle and to see them and to learn and to mirror what they're saying and doing and understanding and study. So when I look at all of that, I just realize there are a bunch of different reasons for why people are where they're at. And there are a bunch of different reasons for why people are stubborn and will not dig into it. But it's going to take humility amongst our leaders to really look at the facts. I'll give you some good news here. About, I want to say 2 months ago, maybe 2.5, 3 months ago, there was a professor. His name is on the tip of my tongue. If you remember, let me know. Doctor, he's on the East Coast. His son teaches at Fuller, and they just wrote a book, a co-authored book by the two of them that's going to be coming out this coming September. Doctor, oh my goodness. It will come to me, and then I will get back to you. But this professor of a well-known seminary wrote the book in the 80s, the non-affirming theological book that we used for decades. And other people would reference him and use him and so forth. Well, he just came out as affirming 2.5 months ago, you guys. Great news, exciting news. And the entire theological world turned upside down. What are we going to do now? What's going on? Oh, he turned to Satan. Oh, he's a bad guy. He doesn't love Jesus anymore. And all these narratives they have to make up in order to hold on to their preconceived narrative. So all I ask these people is, can you read his book first and then we'll talk? Don't you want to know why he changed his mind? Do you not have any intellectual curiosity at all? So if you have to make stuff up to hold on to your preconceived narrative, then maybe it's time to reconsider your narrative. And all of this comes down to a misunderstanding in the translation. And when we look at the Bible, it is a joint venture between a holy, perfect, divine God and imperfect human beings, in many cases, not as educated as we would like to think. And when you have a joint venture like that, the God part is not where the problem is at. It's the human connection in that joint venture where we're going to have problems. And in some cases, we can see some things that Christians did that were pretty bad in the last 2,000 years in the name of religion and abused things. And we also see some innocent mistakes. And when I've looked at translation notes on this topic for 8 versions of the Bible, and I've actually looked at translation notes, the translators left behind notes in many occasions. When I look at the translation notes for the Bible, and I've looked at more than any other human on the planet, and I can verify that because 3 of the translation note archives I went to told me I was the first person to ever ask to see any of their translation notes for any reason. That made me sad. Why are people so able and quick to write an anti-gay book and they haven't even looked at archives? I don't understand. I don't get it. I'm confused. I'm flabbergasted. But they are able to write those books. So when I look at these translation notes and I see what's going on in these translation notes, and I see the honest mistake that took place in 1946, perpetuated in the 1950s, happened in the 1960s. The 1960s were very important for translation. It was the time, it was the decade. The 1960s was the decade when the New International Version was being translated, when the New American Standard Bible was being translated, and when the Living Bible was being translated. Those 3 very influential, important English versions were being translated in the 1960s. And they all had this influence of a little homophobia that was starting to come out. We started to see things on the news, several years after Stonewall, but we also are seeing some things going on. And so all the influence created a culture. And so that culture influenced the translation and the translation notes and the translators. So I like to tell people when they try to quote back English versions of the Bible, and they come to me, random strangers, and say, have you ever read Leviticus 18:22? Yes, in about 8 different languages. Which one would you like me to quote it to you in? And when they have no idea the study that I've done, and they are all excited to talk about what Leviticus 18:22 says, And then I let them know that's not, you can't support that from the original Hebrew text. You can't be anti-gay from the original Greek New Testament unless you're twisting a few things around there. And it was an innocent mistake by a lot of people throughout, especially the last century, but a little bit in the 19th century, and not so much in the same way in previous centuries as far as using the Bible for their anti-gay rhetoric. We can see other sources to create this anti-gay sentiment, but it was very hard to use the Bible to be anti-gay for certain chunks of history and certain verses that were never used. 1 Corinthians 6:9 and 1 Timothy 1:10 were not even considered part of the anti-gay list of verses you're going to use for the vast majority of history. That started to come about in the last century. And I have evidence when I've looked into these things to prove this. So just to kind of look at that, to see what's going on, and to see all of these translations and the fact that the Bible is this joint venture and mistakes can be made in translation and have been made. It's not the first time. I can show you guys mistakes, but I encourage people who try to quote these verses to me as if I've never seen these verses of the Bible, and let them know, be careful not to have more faith in the translator than you do in the creator. And that's where the problem comes down a lot of times. They have to put more faith in that translator, that fallible, human, mistake-ridden person, than they do in God. That's, to me, crazy. And so to kind of look at how this goes and how it transpired and what's happened throughout history, we're in an exciting time because it's us and the people a little older than us, a little younger than us. It's our time in history, you guys, to help fix this. 200 years ago, it was their time in history to fix slavery with the abolitionist movement. 200 years before that, they were working through a lot of the things in the post-Reformation period and trying to get that up and going and trying to fix this very, very tarnished church that was very abusive in so many ways and abusing money and abusing power. And a couple hundred years before that, it was the Crusades, going and killing anybody who was not of your faith. So every couple of hundred years, we have a group of people who have some kind of a challenge, and they need to fix it, and they need to work through it and walk through it to help for the next 200 years. And 200 years from now, or maybe less, there will be another challenge, and something else will come along. And that group of people will be responsible to fix that and walk through that. But we've got this, whether we like it or not, whether we want it or not, you guys, it's our challenge.
Thank you so much, Ed. I am astounded. I have watched a lot of interviews with you and seen you at, like, you're so passionate about it every single time. Like, I'm so, like, it is wild to me because I know that it also comes at a cost to you, like personal, emotional, all of these things. And like the fact that you still have so much passion after years and years of talking about it and saying yes to people like me to talk about it more is just really outstanding. We have a question here that I think is really interesting. And so Hillary asks, was there any interview or interaction that did not make it into the film that had a particular impact on you?
So yes, there was one, and you guys, our editor was so good. I just think she did an amazing job because she had a lot of stuff to work with. And she's based out of New York. And when I met her, I was just so impressed. So she's not a believer, she's not a Christian, and she's not religious, but she was just very interested in our story. And so she was hired to do this work. She's worked in several documentaries and shows before. She worked in a Paris Hilton thing and did a really good job with that. But her work is just amazing. And one of the first things she said to me was when she saw me in New York, was she said, I am so sorry I couldn't put that in about the mama bears because we just didn't have the space in that. And I didn't know what had made it in or whatever at the time were details about what was going on. And I knew what she was talking about. So Kathy Baldock and I do a lot of research. Kathy had come to town and we were going to go at one of the archives. There are several archives located not too far from where I live in the LA area. And so Kathy came to town, and we were going to do some research, and also we were doing a seminar at a church in Hollywood. And that's actually where we met Rocky, when she came to kind of see what we were doing and wanted to kind of follow us around like the Kardashians or something for a while. It was a interesting 4 years. So what happened was she came to town, we were speaking, we were doing some research, a lot of different things going on. But the week before that, the week leading up until this, I had a lot of preparation to do for my part in the seminar that we were doing. And I started to feel really heavy for my family, because since my brother had, turned them against me and things were going south and it was really tough, I needed family members that were at least showing some sign of movement in this area. And I don't know why, but I just needed it. I needed it because I couldn't rest. I couldn't study well. I was just having a hard time. So I called my mom and I just started talking to her, and I think she would have come along with all this had my youngest brother not influenced her. But I thought, you know what, maybe I should ask some litmus test questions to kind of help her along. And so one of the litmus test questions I use for some people is the rate of suicide amongst LGBT people is very high. It's a very high suicide rate. But if that person comes from a Christian home, that already high suicide rate goes up by over 8 times. So that's got to say something, right? That should speak to, maybe we've been getting some bad advice for the past few decades. And so my mom, I had shared with her that before, and I said, Mom, tell me, why do you think that LGBT people have such a high suicide rate, especially coming from Christian homes? What do you think that is? Without hesitation, she said, well, of course it makes sense. They're rebelling against God, so what do you expect? And my heart sank even lower. I was needing my heart to come up a little bit. And I not only didn't get that, it hurt more. I called my other brother, not the one that I talked about earlier, but my other brother. He's a police officer in Houston. And I started talking to him. I thought maybe I can get a little sense of he's moving along on this. And so, so I asked him, I said, oh, here's another litmus test question. So how do you think people become gay? Okay. Are they born that way, or do they choose that kind of thing? And instantly he said, well, they choose it, obviously. And I said, well, did you choose to be straight? And he said, yes. And I said, when did you make this decision? He said, when I was born. I'm confused. So if you're confused, don't feel alone. And I said, oh, so I started to try and talk to him about a few things. And I said, well, I've interviewed hundreds, if not thousands, of LGBT people, and I've never met a single one who chose to be gay. In fact, the vast majority I've met, they've been trying to choose to be straight, and it just hasn't worked out. And so he said, well, I'm a police officer and I get trained on this. So I know, he thinks he knows more than I know about LGBT people because of what training he's gotten. And so he thought I was challenging that. And I said, no, I respect you as a police officer, and I respect your training, and everything's fine. But I said, I've got my master's degree in theology and studying Greek and Hebrew language, and I've studied this particular topic, and I've more than 99% of the pastors in the US. And I said, are you respecting, me? He said, okay, I'll respect you too, So it just kind of went down that path. And so I was hurting. I needed family. And my own mom, it just felt like was in this position where she just couldn't extend an arm of a hug. And I needed moms. And there's a group called Mama Bears. And I'm sure a lot of you guys have heard of that. Maybe some people, people in Mama Bears. Mama Bears is amazing. So they're moms of LGBTQ kids, and they come together to help support each other when their kid comes out. And so maybe if you have someone has a trans kid, and they're like, I don't know what to do. And they talk to other moms of trans kids, and they're like, oh, now I understand. I have like a mentor, so to speak, to kind of walk through this journey. And that started off mostly as mothers of faith, but they've extended beyond that. And so it's just moms, period. And so it's an amazing resource. And so these Mama Bears are just amazing. So I have a couple of Mama Bear friends of mine, Sarah Cunningham and Liz Dyer, and they are amazing. And I reached out to them and just said, I'm just hurting. I just needed to talk to a mom. And Liz was on the phone, kind of helping me walk through some of this. And then she says, is it okay if I mention this to a few other Mama Bears? And I said, sure, go for it. And within a couple of days, I started getting cards and letters in the mail, like a stack of them. Okay. I have a lot of cards and letters from these mama bears. I'm praying for you. I heard about your situation. I'm there for you. And just all these wonderful words to say. It was wonderful. And then um, a week later, so all these cards and letters had come in the mail. A week later, Kathy Baldock's in my house, and we're getting ready to go out to something that we were working on in one of the projects. And this package had come in the mail. And I hadn't opened it yet. And I thought, because a lot of the packages I get, they're like, 400-year-old Bibles. So I thought maybe it's one of those I just hadn't opened up yet. And I didn't get around to it. And so Kathy is in the morning, we're getting ready to go. And Kathy goes to jump in the shower. So I'm like, oh, I'll just open it up and see what's inside this box. And when I did, it was a felt tie blanket. I don't know if you know what that is, but it's where they take two pieces of felt and they cut little strips around them, and then they tie the edges all the way around these felt blankets. And so they make a blanket out of it. It's a felt blanket. And I opened it up and I just started crying. And I fell to the ground, all curled up, and I just started crying. And I couldn't even talk. And then Kathy comes out of the bathroom and she's like, oh, Ed, where are you? Hello. And I couldn't even say I'm over here in the dining room. I just froze. And she came in and found me and she said, oh, honey, what's going on? And I pointed to the box. And because I couldn't say anything, she looked at the box and she saw the note made by Mama Bears with love for you, especially for you, and this really nice felt tied blanket. And I couldn't explain to her why it hit me so hard. And so I was like, I need some time to myself. I need to get away for a few minutes. So I got up and I walked across the kitchen, and all I could get out of my mouth to explain to Kathy so she knew what was going on was I said, my mom in her mom's groups makes those felt blankets for homeless people. And I just belted out tears and ran to my room and started crying because my own mom makes these very same blankets for people who are homeless. And right now, I'm homeless and she can't give me her love. She's not capable of making that blanket for her own homeless kid in this situation who felt homeless. But these mama bears stepped in when my mom couldn't. And they took that place and they made that blanket and they sent it to me, not having any idea about my mom ministering to the homeless through those very same tie blankets. So it hit me just amazingly. And so that was a story that the editor loved and she wanted to put it in the movie, but you have to have enough background story to get it in there. And it just takes up too many minutes. And so she realized it couldn't, but yeah.
That's powerful. Thank God for mama bears out there and papa bears, and all the folks who nurture us and care for us in the ways that we deserve to be and the ways that our family um, can't or won't sometimes. Thanks. Thank you for that, Ed.
Blair, I'm wondering, because you've seen the film a number of times, I'm wondering if you have any questions for Ed.
I'm not sure I have a question. I certainly have a profound gratitude. At considerable personal cost, you have lifted up another resource for people who take the time to understand just how wrong we got it. And I wonder if you could reflect. I certainly know that I could, but how does this conversation have any relevance to kids who, I'm not going to ask it that way. Let me say what I'm thinking out of some observations that colleagues of mine have made. And this is the observation, across religious traditions in all stripes, Buddhist, Muslim, Christian, Jews, in all versions of that, Pentecostal, on fire for Jesus, traditional, there has never been a mass exodus from these places like we've seen in Gen Z. the observation I make, and I just would like you to reflect back, the observation I make is that this kind of conversation renders a life of faith completely irrelevant because they don't give a damn. Right? This age group has moved way past, and it feels like they're watching old people talk about something that doesn't matter at all in any religious tradition. So they're rejecting it completely. That's the observation that a colleague of mine has made with me. I just wondered if you have a thought about that.
Absolutely. I haven't thought about everything if you haven't noticed by now. But
we're meeting for the first time, so it's like
so I have a very good friend of mine from Germany, actually. He actually helped me when I first discovered some German old Bibles, and he's helping me to do the translation of word for word and what's going in there. So this guy, straight guy from Germany, and he came over to study. He was a student over here, and so he rented a room from me here in Long Beach, California. And we got to become really good friends. And the interesting thing was, okay, so he was not raised in a Christian home. And as most people of, that are currently in their 20s and 30s, he's in his 30s right now, but most people, they weren't raised in a Christian home. They weren't exposed to a lot of things that we were. Where a lot of those who were raised in a Christian home, so we have certain verses memorized, whether we try to memorize them or not. We have certain passages that we can have 3 sermons off this one passage because we've heard it so many times. And so we're regurgitating things rather than living it or it kind of indwelling in us in a certain way, if that's the best way to put it. And so long story short, he was so excited to see my excitement for researching and digging in. And we discovered so much from the German translations, and so much Germany has so much history to this portion and this topic. And his attitude was, like a lot of his peers, why do I want to go to church? The straight people, even, they're like, I don't want to go to a church. You guys don't like my gay friends. And why do I want to go to a church that doesn't like my gay friends and doesn't respect my gay friends? That makes no sense at all. So because of the gay issue, the church has lost a lot of people, not just gays, but straights, because of the way that they've treated the gays. And so he saw me and my life, and he lived here for almost a year. And he said, I want what you've got. That's the Jesus I want to know, not the one that people talk about and you hear about in sermons and on TV and stuff like that. So when he went back to Germany, he started going to a church. And he was all excited to go there and to learn. And he got to this point where he started hearing them say some things kind of anti-gay. And he thought, wow, that's kind of strange. That I don't think my friend Ed would agree with that. So he called me and he said, what do you think about this? And I was so glad he's going to a church. And he said, what do you think about this? And I said, Andy, you know more about this area than that pastor who was giving the sermon on this last Sunday. And even it was the pastor, I forget what her name was, he was talking about her. So even though she's giving this message and she's saying that thing, she hasn't been exposed to what you have. And I bet if you asked her, she'd probably have no idea that her own German Bible didn't have the word homosexual until 1983. You know more than she does in certain parts of this conversation. So don't hold it against her. Maybe she hasn't had a chance to study it or to dig into it yet. But whatever you do, Andy, don't throw out the baby with the bathwater. Don't throw out Jesus because you have a pastor who hasn't done her homework on this. And he's like, baby in bathwater. This is his first time to hear that expression. So we had to go and explain that. But he's like, this makes a lot of sense. I understand that. And so I have seen so many people in this category. They've seen my life. They've seen the lives of other LGBT Christians. And they say, you haven't said F you to the church. I want to know more about you and your faith. And maybe I don't want to throw Jesus out right now yet too. And so we might be the only true Jesus that they ever hear about, right? We might be the only chance they ever listen to what's really going on in the gospel message before certain portions of the Christian community have perverted what's really been there all along. Right. And we kind of have to go down that path. But I think that makes me excited because when I look at that, this whole generation has grown up not even going to church. No. That's actually a good thing because they don't have baggage they're carrying in with them. So when Andy calls me from Germany and he says, this scripture passage I'm reading, this is amazing. Do you see what this says? This is wow. What nice freshness we need. And if it takes a purge to get back to true freshness, then maybe that's what we need to do.
I was actually going there with you. It's like this is what's required. I have to tell you, I came out when I was 53, and I finally got Good Friday and Easter Sunday as a lived experience, and that's the place from which I operate. So,
Good.
Yeah,
Good. Thanks.
yeah, really cool.
Thank you both. Thank you so much, Ed. This was such a generous time to take your night, and you just came from another event and joined us here. So thank you again for just being open for who you are. As Blair said, and what I know, somebody who tells my story a lot, is it's liberating and it comes at a cost. And I hope that you feel from Canada, across Canada, just so much gratitude for the pivotal role that you've played in this. And you know, one thing that I've heard you say many times is still leading with love, and that's a good reminder for me because I don't always want to do that. But yeah, I just appreciate you so much, and thank you again for taking the time to spend with us today.